The universe had grown quiet under the hegemony's rule. For 3,000 years, their empire had swallowed civilizations like a great beast, devouring its prey. No species had ever stopped their advance. The galaxy learned to fear the sight of their black ships cutting through space, leaving nothing but submission or death in their wake. Alex Reeves checked the tactical display for the 100th time that morning. The numbers never changed, but he kept hoping they would. 800 enemy vessels approached the Tau Ceti system. His ship, the Defiant, was humanity's last operational warship. 43 souls remained aboard, all volunteers who had chosen to stay when the evacuation orders came. The communications console crackled with static. Hayes, his communications officer, looked up with tired eyes. "Commander, we just lost contact with the outer colonies. That means they got New Brisbane, too." Reeves nodded but said nothing. New Brisbane had been humanity's agricultural center, home to 12 million people. Now it was another glowing crater on some hegemony tactical map. The aliens never bothered to colonize the worlds they conquered. They simply destroyed anything that might resist and moved on to the next target. The bridge felt smaller than usual. Half the crew had families on the evacuation ships now racing toward the galactic rim. The other half had lost their families already. They all knew this was a one-way mission, but nobody spoke about it. There was something comforting in pretending they might live to see tomorrow. "Sir, incoming transmission from Admiral Kane," Hayes reported. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a weathered face marked by 6 months of constant retreat. Kane had commanded the human fleet since Earth fell. Now he commanded nothing but memories and hope. "Alex, the last transport cleared the system boundary 20 minutes ago. Our people are safe, at least for now. The hegemony will follow eventually, but you've bought them precious time." Kane's voice carried the weight of a man who had watched his entire civilization crumble. "I won't lie to you, son. What you're about to do is impossible. One ship against their entire invasion force. But sometimes impossible is the only option left." Reeves straightened in his chair. "Understood, Admiral. We'll hold the line. Make them remember us, Commander. Make them remember that humans don't surrender." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Outside the viewports, space looked peaceful. Stars twinkled in the void, unchanged by the war raging across the galaxy. It was hard to believe that somewhere among those distant lights, an alien armada was approaching with enough firepower to crack planets. Chief Engineer Rodriguez emerged from the lower decks, wiping grease from her hands. "Commander, I've pushed the reactor to maximum output. We're running at 150% of normal capacity. It won't last long, but it'll give us everything we've got." "How long?" Reeves asked. "Maybe a week if we're lucky. Maybe less if we push it too hard in combat." Lieutenant Nash, the weapons officer, spoke up from his station. "All missile tubes are loaded. Point defense systems are online. I've redistributed power from life support to give us extra juice for the main guns. Navigator Webb plotted their position on the system map. I've identified 17 asteroid fields and debris zones we can use for cover. The hegemony ships are big and slow. If we stay mobile, we might last longer than they expect." Dr. Morgan, their medical officer, had set up triage stations throughout the ship. She'd also prepared something nobody talked about, but everyone understood. When the time came, nobody would be taken alive by the hegemony. Their treatment of prisoners was legendary across the galaxy, and none of it was pleasant. The first enemy, scouts appeared on long-range sensors 3 hours later. Sleek black ships that moved like predators stalking prey. They maintained their distance, studying the lone human vessel with what might have been curiosity. Behind them, the main fleet would arrive soon. "They're probably wondering if we're insane," Hayes said, monitoring their communications. "I'm picking up encrypted chatter. Sounds like they can't believe we're still here." Let them wonder. Reeves replied, "Confusion is about the only advantage we have." The hours crawled by. More enemy ships appeared, spreading out to surround the system. They moved with practiced efficiency, cutting off every escape route. Their formations were perfect, disciplined, unstoppable. It was like watching a natural disaster unfold in slow motion. Young Lieutenant Park, barely out of the academy, stood at the sensor station. She'd volunteered to stay because her parents had died defending Mars. "Commander, I'm reading massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. The main fleet is arriving." The tactical display lit up with red dots. Hundreds of them, each one representing a warship larger than anything humanity had ever built. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, battle cruisers that could level continents, fighter carriers that held more ships than the entire human fleet at its peak. "Well," Rodriguez said quietly, "at least we won't die wondering what they look like." The enemy fleet arranged itself in attack formation. Their movements were precise, professional, overwhelming. They had done this dance 1,000 times before with 1,000 different species. Always, the outcome was the same. But something was different this time. Instead of immediately advancing to finish the battle, they stopped. The entire armada hung in space, as if its commanders were trying to understand why a single human ship refused to run. Reeves stood and walked to the main viewport. Space had never looked so beautiful or so deadly. Somewhere out there, the last of humanity was racing toward an uncertain future. Here, 43 people prepared to write the final chapter of human military history. All hands. This is the "Commander," he announced over the ship's communication system. "In a few hours, we're going to face the biggest fleet in galactic history. They expect us to surrender or run. They expect us to be like every other species they've conquered. But we're not like the others. We're human, and humans don't break." He paused, looking at each of his officers in turn. These people had become his family over the past 6 months. They'd shared victories and defeats, hope and despair. Now they would share one final moment together. "Our mission is simple. Hold this position. Make them fight for every meter of space. Show the galaxy that some things are worth dying for. If we're going to make our last stand, let's make it one they'll never forget." The crew returned to their stations with quiet determination. Outside, 800 alien warships prepared to attack. Inside the Defiant, 43 humans prepared to show the universe what defiance looked like. Supreme Admiral Corks had never encountered a situation like this in 3 centuries of conquest. His vast command ship, the Eternal Dominion, dwarfed the small human vessel that sat motionless in their path. 800 warships surrounded the single enemy craft, enough firepower to shatter moons, and yet the humans made no move to flee. The bridge of the Dominion buzzed with quiet activity. Officers moved between stations, coordinating the massive fleet's positioning. Tactical. Displays showed the perfect encirclement they had achieved around the human ship. Everything was proceeding according to standard doctrine except for one puzzling detail. "Supreme Admiral," reported his second-in-command, General Thane, "the human vessel maintains position directly in our advance route. All escape vectors have been sealed. They have no options remaining." Cork studied the tactical display with growing curiosity. The human ship was tiny compared to his dreadnoughts, barely larger than a hegemony patrol craft. Its weapons were primitive, its armor laughably thin. By all logic, it should have fled the moment his scouts appeared. "Have you identified the vessel's class and capabilities?" Corks asked. "Yes, Supreme Admiral. Our intelligence files classify it as a human-heavy cruiser, designation UNSC Defiant. Crew complement approximately 40 to 50 beings. Standard. Kinetic weapons, basic energy shields, conventional fusion drive. Nothing that poses any threat to our forces." The Supreme Admiral had conquered over 200 species during his long career. each had followed predictable patterns when faced with overwhelming force. First came desperate attempts at negotiation, then futile defensive preparations. Finally, surrender or desperate flight. The humans, however, seemed content to simply wait. Perhaps they are malfunctioning, suggested Commander Vale, the fleet's intelligence officer. Their technology is primitive. Engine failure could explain their inability to retreat. No, Cork said thoughtfully. Their power signatures indicate full operational status. They are choosing to remain. He paused, considering the implications. Open a communication channel. Let us hear what they have to say. The main screen flickered as the transmission connected. The bridge fell silent as an alien face appeared, different from any species they had encountered before. The human's features were sharp, determined, showing no sign of the fear that typically marked a doomed commander. "Hegemony Fleet," the human said in a calm, steady voice. "This is Commander Alex Reeves of the United Nations Space Command vessel Defiant. You are trespassing in human territory. Turn around and leave, or we will be forced to engage. Several." Officers exchanged glances of disbelief. General Thane's mouth opened slightly in shock. Commander Vale actually laughed, though he quickly stifled the sound when Corks shot him a warning look. "Interesting," Corks murmured, then activated his own communication system. His voice carried the authority of 3 millennia of conquest. "Human Commander, I am Supreme Admiral Corks of the Hegemony Second Fleet. You are facing 800 warships. Your single vessel cannot possibly threaten our forces. Surrender immediately, and your deaths will be swift. Continue this display of defiance, and we will ensure your suffering serves as an example to others." The human's expression never changed. If anything, he seemed almost amused by the threat. "Supreme Admiral, with respect, we've heard those promises before. Your empire made similar offers to Earth, to Mars, to New Terra. We've seen what hegemony, mercy looks like." "Then you understand the futility of resistance," Corks replied. "No species has ever successfully opposed our advance. Your human fleets have been scattered. Your worlds lie in ruins. You are alone." "Maybe," Reeves said, "but alone doesn't mean defeated. You want to pass through this system, you'll have to go through us first." The transmission ended, leaving the Dominion's bridge in stunned silence. Officers stared at their displays, trying to process what they had just witnessed. A single ship challenging an entire invasion fleet was beyond their experience. "Supreme Admiral," General Thane said carefully, "surely they cannot be serious. One vessel against our armada? The mathematics alone make victory impossible." Corks had studied human military doctrine during the campaign. These creatures fought differently than other species. Where most civilizations calculated odds and surrendered when defeat became inevitable, humans seemed to grow more dangerous when cornered. But even human stubbornness had limits. "Perhaps they hope to delay us," Commander Vale suggested. "Force us to waste time and resources on a meaningless engagement. Their evacuation ships could gain precious hours while we deal with this nuisance." "Possible," Corks agreed. "But there are easier ways to buy time. They could have mined the system, deployed automated defenses, forced us to clear obstacles. Instead, they choose to make a personal stand." He studied the tactical display again. "What do our files say about human psychology?" Vale consulted his datapad. "Highly individualistic species. Strong emphasis on personal honor and sacrifice. Historical records show repeated instances of small forces holding positions against overwhelming odds. They seem to view such actions as heroic rather than wasteful." "Fascinating," Cork said, "and potentially dangerous. Other species are watching our advance. If word spreads that a single human ship delayed the hegemony fleet, it could encourage further resistance elsewhere." General Thane nodded. "Then we should destroy them quickly and continue our advance. A demonstration of overwhelming force will reinforce our reputation." Corks considered the options. Destroying the human ship would take minutes. But something about the situation troubled him. In 3 centuries of warfare, he had learned to trust his instincts. The humans were planning something beyond a simple suicide charge. "Begin attack formations," he ordered, "but proceed carefully. Deploy our fighters first. Let them test the human defenses before we commit our main forces." The massive fleet began to move, dreadnoughts sliding into attack positions with practiced precision. Fighter squadrons launched from carrier bays, their sleek forms racing toward the lone human vessel. The Defiant remained motionless, apparently waiting for the inevitable. But as the first wave of fighters approached their target, something unexpected happened. The human ship suddenly erupted into motion, diving toward a nearby asteroid field with impossible agility. Point defense systems blazed to life, destroying 3 fighters in the first seconds of combat. More surprising still, additional human vessels appeared from hidden positions among the asteroids. Smaller craft, barely visible on sensors, struck at the fighter formation with devastating precision. Within minutes, an entire squadron had been eliminated. "Report!" Corks barked. "The humans were concealed throughout the asteroid field," his tactical officer replied. "At least 20 small vessels, possibly more. They're using the terrain to mask their movements and strike from ambush." Corks smiled grimly. Now the humans were showing their true nature. They had not simply chosen to die in place. They had prepared a trap, turned the entire system into a battlefield designed to favor their smaller, more agile vessels. "Very clever," he admitted. "They understand they cannot win a direct engagement, so they force us to fight on their terms." He turned to his officers. "This changes nothing. We have numerical superiority that no tactical advantage can overcome. Order the 2nd and 3rd squadrons to advance. Clear those asteroids." But even as he gave the orders, Corks felt a strange sensation he had not experienced in decades. The humans had surprised him. After 3 centuries of predictable conquests, an enemy had done something unexpected. For the first time since the campaign began, the Supreme Admiral wondered if humanity might have one more surprise waiting. The asteroid field had become a maze of death and metal. Human fighters danced between the floating rocks like deadly spirits, appearing just long enough to strike before vanishing again into the shadows. The hegemony's superior numbers meant nothing when they could only engage a few targets at a time. Rodriguez pushed the Defiant's engines beyond their safety limits, threading the massive ship through gaps that should have been impossible to navigate. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits as the vessel twisted and turned through the asteroid maze, its hull scraping against rock faces that missed by mere meters. "Incoming fighters bearing 27 Mark IV, Nash called out from his weapons. "Station." His fingers moved across the controls like a pianist playing a deadly symphony. The ship's main guns swiveled to track the approaching enemy craft, filling space with streams of superheated plasma. 3 hegemony fighters exploded in brilliant flashes. The others scattered, trying to find cover among the asteroids. But the human defenders knew every hiding spot, every shadow, every angle of approach. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Lieutenant Park monitored the tactical display from her sensor station. "Commander, I'm reading massive troop movements. In the main fleet, they're getting frustrated with our hit-and-run tactics." "Good," Reeves replied, gripping his command chair as the ship shuddered under enemy fire. "Frustrated enemies make mistakes." Captain Brooks led a squadron of humanity's last fighters in a desperate dance around the hegemony's advance elements. His craft, originally designed for patrol duties, had been modified with extra weapons and armor plating. It wasn't much, but every advantage counted when facing impossible odds. "Brooks to Defiant," his voice crackled over the communication system. "We've got heavy cruisers moving into the asteroid field. They're trying to flush us out with concentrated bombardment." Through the viewports, Reeves could see the enemy ships advancing. Each one was 3 times the size of the Defiant, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Their commanders had grown tired of the cat and mouse game and decided to simply destroy everything in their path. All fighters, this is Reeves. Fall back to defensive positions around the Defiant. We're going to make our stand here. The human vessels converged on their flagship's position, forming a protective screen around the larger ship. It was a pathetically small force compared to what approached, but they moved with the precision of a unit that had trained together and fought together through humanity's darkest hours. Webb, the navigator, had prepared for this moment. Commander, I'm reading gravitational anomalies in Sector 7. There's an unstable asteroid with a heavy metal core. If we can lure them close enough... Do it, Reeves ordered. The Defiant suddenly broke from cover, racing across open space, toward the enemy formation. Hegemony commanders, thinking the humans had finally made a tactical error, ordered their ships to pursue. Heavy cruisers and destroyers gave chase, eager to finish the battle that had dragged on for hours. At precisely the right moment, Nash fired every missile the Defiant carried at the unstable asteroid. The explosions triggered a chain reaction that turned thousands of tons of rock and metal into a devastating cloud of debris. 3 enemy ships vanished in the chaos, while others suffered critical damage to their hulls and engines. Beautiful work, Hayes said, monitoring enemy communications. They're reporting heavy casualties to their command ship. I think we just made them angry. The revenge came swiftly. Hegemony dreadnoughts moved into firing position, their massive weapons charging with energy that made space itself shimmer. When they fired, the asteroid field lit up like a miniature sun. 2 human fighters disappeared instantly, vaporized by direct hits from weapons designed to destroy cities. Another was caught in the blast wave and sent tumbling into an asteroid, its pilot's final transmission cut short by static. Brooks is down, Park reported quietly. I'm not reading any life signs from his fighter. Reeves felt each loss like a physical blow. These weren't just crew members, they were friends, family, the last representatives of humanity's military tradition. Every death diminished not just their fighting strength, but their connection to everything they had once been. But there was no time for mourning. More enemy ships poured into the asteroid field, their commanders finally committing the resources needed to crush the human resistance. The mathematics of the battle were becoming clear. No amount of tactical brilliance could overcome such overwhelming numerical superiority. Dr. Morgan's voice came over the internal communication system. All crew, this is medical. We have 14 wounded, 6 critical. I need volunteers to help move patients to the emergency stations. Rodriguez wiped blood from a cut on her forehead, caused by flying debris when the last enemy salvo had shaken the ship. Commander, the reactor is running hot. We're pushing it beyond any reasonable safety margin. If we keep this up, we risk a complete meltdown. How long do we have? Reeves asked. Maybe 6 hours at current power levels. Maybe less if we take more damage. Hayes looked up from his station, his face grim. Sir, I'm intercepting communications from the Hegemony fleet. They're requesting reinforcements from the nearest system. Word of our resistance is spreading. That news hit Reeves harder than any weapon. If the battle was drawing attention from other Hegemony forces, it meant their sacrifice was having an impact beyond this single system. Other species would learn that the mighty empire could be defied, that their reputation for invincibility was not absolute. Nash fired again, his weapons finding their mark on a Hegemony destroyer. The enemy ship's shields flared and failed, allowing human missiles to tear into its hull. But for every enemy vessel they damaged, 2 more took its place. The remaining human fighters formed up around the Defiant for what everyone knew would be their final charge. Lieutenant Commander Wilson, now the senior pilot after Brooks' death, opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. All units, this is Wilson. We've given them a fight they won't forget. Our people are safe because of what we've done here. Now let's finish this properly. The small human force accelerated toward the enemy battle line, weapons blazing. They moved not with the desperation of the doomed, but with the calm determination of people who had found something worth dying for. In the command centers of Hegemony ships throughout the system, Alien officers watched in amazement as the humans refused to break. By every law of military logic, they should have surrendered hours ago. Instead, they fought with increasing ferocity, as if proximity to death made them stronger rather than weaker. Supreme Admiral Quarks observed the battle from his flagship, his expression thoughtful. He had seen courage before, but never anything like this. These humans were teaching his empire something it had forgotten during 3 millennia of easy conquest. Sometimes, the spirit of resistance was more dangerous than any weapon. News traveled faster than starships across the galaxy. In hidden communication networks that had survived 3,000 years of hegemony rule, word of the Battle of Tau Ceti spread like wildfire. A single human warship had held off an entire invasion fleet for 3 days. The impossible was happening. On the mining world of Kelos Prime, alien workers deep in the planet's crust heard the whispered reports. The Kalari had been slaves for 2 centuries, their once proud warrior culture, crushed under hegemony boots. But in the deepest tunnels, where overseers rarely ventured, old songs began to play again. Elder Voss, his scaled hide scarred by decades of forced labor, gathered the younger workers around him. "The humans fight still," he said in their ancient tongue. "1 ship against 800. If they can stand, perhaps we can remember what it means to be free." The rebellion began with small acts of sabotage. Mining equipment suffered mysterious failures. Transport ships developed engine problems. Guard posts experienced communication blackouts. The hegemony garrison commander dismissed these incidents as equipment malfunctions, never suspecting that his perfectly controlled population was rediscovering their courage. Halfway across the galaxy, the architects received the news in their massive space habitats orbiting dead stars. These silicon-based beings had been the galaxy's greatest builders before the hegemony's rise. Now they constructed ships and weapons for their conquerors, their creativity channeled into instruments of oppression. Builder Prime Resonance, a crystalline entity older than most civilizations, processed the data streams coming from Tau Ceti. The mathematics were clear. A force of 43 humans was achieving statistical impossibilities against overwhelming odds. More importantly, they were doing so through innovation and determination rather than superior technology. Fascinating, Resonance transmitted to the Architect Collective. These humans demonstrate that efficient construction applies to resistance as well as engineering. Perhaps our own structures require redesign. The architects' rebellion took a different form. Rather than violence, they simply stopped building weapons for their masters. Production quotas went unfulfilled. Quality control standards mysteriously declined. When hegemony inspectors arrived, they found equipment that looked perfect but failed catastrophically under stress. Even the ethereals, the galaxy's most pacifistic species, began to change. These energy beings had never harmed another living creature, choosing extinction over violence when the hegemony arrived. But something about the human sacrifice touched their collective consciousness. On their sanctuary world of Haven, the Ethereal Council convened for the first time in centuries. They had no physical forms, existing as patterns of pure thought, but their discussions rippled through dimensional space with unusual intensity. "The humans teach us something we had forgotten," communicated the eldest among them. "There are times when peaceful resistance becomes complicity with evil. Perhaps it is time to remember our other capabilities." The ethereals had once been the galaxy's masters of psychic warfare, capable of disrupting minds across star systems. They had abandoned these arts when they chose the path of absolute peace. But watching humanity sacrifice, they began to wonder if some evils demanded active opposition. Supreme Admiral Quarks felt the changes before his intelligence services reported them. Communication delays from conquered worlds, supply shortages that had no logical explanation. garrison commanders requesting additional troops to deal with maintenance issues that sounded suspiciously like coordinated resistance. "Sir," reported Commander Vale from his intelligence station, "we're receiving reports of unrest in over 40 systems. Nothing major yet, but the pattern suggests coordination." General Thane studied the tactical displays with growing concern. "Supreme Admiral, perhaps we should request additional fleets to secure our supply lines. These incidents could escalate if not addressed quickly." Corks turned his attention back to the human vessel that continued to defy his forces. 3 days of constant combat had reduced both sides to exhausted shadows of their former strength. The Defiant showed massive battle damage, its hull pocked with craters and scoring. But somehow, impossibly, it still fought. "How many ships have we lost?" he asked quietly. 47 destroyed, 93 damaged," Vale replied. "The humans have cost us nearly 1/6 of our fleet strength." The numbers were staggering. A single human warship had inflicted casualties that some entire campaigns had failed to achieve. More troubling was the effect on his crew's morale. Veterans who had conquered dozens of worlds now questioned whether victory was certain, but the real damage was spreading far beyond Tau Ceti. Each hour the battle continued, each impossible human success sent shockwaves through the hegemonies. Carefully maintained image of invincibility. 3,000 years of psychological warfare were being undone by 43 humans who refused to surrender. On distant worlds, conquered populations began to ask dangerous questions. If humans could hold off the hegemony fleet, what else might be possible? If the Empire's power was not absolute, what did that mean for their own futures? The hegemony's strength had always been psychological as much as military. Fear was their greatest weapon, the certainty of defeat, their most effective tool. But fear required credibility, and credibility was exactly what the humans were systematically destroying. In the ancient archives of the Zephyrian homeworld, scholars who had spent centuries cataloging their people's decline began to research something new: the histories of successful rebellions. The Zephyrians had been the galaxy's greatest historians before their conquest, and their libraries contained records of every civilization the hegemony had absorbed. Professor Merrick, his tentacles moving rapidly across holographic displays, uncovered patterns that had been invisible before. "Look at this," he transmitted to his colleagues. "Every successful resistance begins the same way. A single act of defiance that proves the Empire can be hurt. The humans were providing that proof. Their sacrifice was becoming a beacon for species that had forgotten what freedom looked like. But the cost was becoming unbearable. Aboard the Defiant, the crew had been reduced to 18 operational members. Life support was failing. The reactor was operating beyond any safety margin. Hull breaches had been patched with whatever materials they could find. Commander Reeves limped from station to station, checking on his people. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were symbols. Everything they did was being watched by civilizations across the galaxy, and every moment they continued fighting sent a message that resistance was possible. Hayes intercepted another transmission from deep space. "Commander, I'm picking up coded signals from at least 12 different systems. It looks like organized resistance movements are forming. They're using our tactical frequency as a coordination channel." Dr. Morgan looked up from treating Nash's wounds. The weapons officer had been caught in an explosion but refused to leave his post. "Commander, I have to be honest. We're losing people faster than we can treat them. The crew won't last another day at this rate." Reeves nodded grimly. He had known from the beginning that this was a suicide mission. But somehow, in 3 days of impossible combat, they had achieved something beyond military victory. They had given the galaxy hope. Outside the viewports, the hegemony fleet prepared for what looked like their final assault. Massive dreadnoughts moved into position, their weapons charging for a bombardment that would finally end the human resistance. But even as death approached, new signals arrived from across the galaxy. The Kalari had seized control of 3 mining worlds. The architects had destroyed a major shipyard. The ethereals had begun using their psychic abilities against hegemony commanders. The rebellion was spreading, and it all traced back to a single human ship that had refused to move when an empire demanded its surrender. Dawn was breaking over a new galaxy, though few recognized it yet. The first sign came as massive energy signatures on the edge of the Tau Ceti system, detected by both human and hegemony sensors simultaneously. Ships were arriving, but not the reinforcements either side expected. The Kalari resistance fleet materialized first, their ancient warships emerging from hyperspace with weapons already charged. Behind them came the architects' construction vessels, hastily converted into carriers, for weapons that defied conventional physics. Even the ethereals had sent representatives, their energy forms contained within crystalline matrices that pulsed with otherworldly power. Supreme Admiral Quarks stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. The readings made no sense. Species that had been conquered centuries ago were fielding military forces that shouldn't exist. Technologies that had been suppressed were somehow operational again. "Sir," General Thane reported, his voice tight with shock, "I'm reading 17 different fleet signatures. Species we haven't heard from in decades. Some we thought were extinct." The communication channels erupted with transmissions in languages the hegemony had tried to erase from galactic memory. Ancient war songs, battle cries in tongues that had been silent for generations, voices speaking words that had been forbidden for centuries. Commander Reeves, barely conscious after 3 days of continuous combat, watched the impossible sight unfold outside his battered ship. The Defiant's hull was held together by emergency, patches, and desperate hope. Only 12 crew members remained operational, but somehow they had witnessed the galaxy's awakening. "Hayes," he whispered to his communications officer, "are you getting this?" Hayes, his face streaked with blood from a head wound, nodded weakly. "Yes, sir. Multiple fleets requesting permission to engage the hegemony force. They're all asking the same question: are we still fighting?" Through sheer force of will, Reeves pulled himself upright in his command chair. The moment had come to decide whether humanity's sacrifice would inspire salvation or merely add more victims to the hegemonies. "Count. Open a channel to all vessels," he ordered. The view screen flickered to life, showing the battered bridge of humanity's last warship. Reeves knew he looked terrible, knew his ship was falling apart around him, knew that he might be speaking the final words any human would ever transmit to the galaxy. "To all free peoples of the galaxy," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "This is Commander Alex Reeves of the human vessel Defiant. For 3 days we have held this position against impossible odds. We did not fight because we thought we could win. We fought because some things are worth dying for." He paused, looking around at his surviving crew. These people had given everything for an ideal, and their sacrifice was about to bear fruit beyond anything they had imagined. The hegemony has ruled through fear for 3,000 years. They have convinced the galaxy that resistance is futile, that submission is the only path to survival. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show the universe that freedom is not a gift to be granted by tyrants, but a right to be seized by the brave. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Kalari, warriors roared their ancient battle cries. Architect vessels began broadcasting construction songs that turned their ships into instruments of creative destruction. The ethereal's crystalline forms pulsed with energy that made nearby space shimmer with possibility. Supreme Admiral Quarks realized he was facing something unprecedented in 3 millennia of conquest. This wasn't just another rebellion to be crushed. This was the awakening of an entire galaxy's suppressed desire for freedom, catalyzed by a single act of human defiance. "All vessels, this is the Supreme Admiral," he transmitted on all frequencies. "You face the full might of the hegemony's Second Fleet. Return to your worlds immediately or face the consequences of your actions. The reply came not from any single commander, but as a chorus of voices speaking in dozens of languages. The message was simple and universal. No. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The hegemony fleet, designed to crush individual civilizations through overwhelming force, found itself fighting an enemy that couldn't be defeated by conventional tactics. Each species brought unique capabilities that had been hidden or forgotten during centuries of subjugation. The Kalari ships moved like living things, their organic hulls adapting to damage in real time. The architects' vessels seemed to rebuild themselves between attacks, their crews somehow constructing new weapons and defenses during combat. The ethereals provided something even more valuable. They disrupted hegemony communications and command structures, turning the alien fleet's coordination against itself. But it was the human ship at the center of the battle that provided something none of the others could: inspiration. The Defiant continued to fight even as its systems failed one by one. Its crew, reduced to a handful of wounded survivors, somehow found the strength to keep their weapons firing. Nash, his arm in a makeshift sling, managed one final missile salvo that crippled a hegemony dreadnought. Rodriguez, working with burns covering half her body, somehow kept the reactor stable even as the ship shook apart around them. Dr. Morgan had abandoned her medical station to help Hayes coordinate communications with the Allied fleets. Her voice, calm despite the chaos, provided tactical updates that helped the diverse species work together as a unified force. Multiple enemy vessels breaking formation, Park reported from sensors, her young voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was witnessing. The hegemony fleet is fracturing under coordinated assault, but Supreme Admiral Corks had one final gambit. Rather than face the humiliation of defeat, he ordered his remaining dreadnoughts to concentrate all firepower on the human vessel that had started this rebellion. If he could destroy the symbol of resistance, perhaps the Alliance would collapse. All vessels target the human ship, he commanded. Eliminate the source of this uprising. The concentrated bombardment was devastating. Every remaining hegemony weapon turned toward the Defiant, filling space with enough energy to vaporize a small moon. The human ship's shields failed instantly. Its hull began to crack under the assault. But as the Defiant started to die, something extraordinary happened. The Allied fleets moved to protect it, forming a defensive barrier around humanity's last warship. Kalari vessels took hits meant for the humans. Architect ships used their construction abilities to create energy shields around the battered cruiser. The ethereals poured their life force into keeping the human vessel operational. They're protecting us, Hayes whispered in amazement. The entire galaxy is trying to save our ship. Commander Reeves felt tears streaming down his face as he watched species that had been enemies for millennia working together to preserve the spark of rebellion they had ignited. The Defiant was no longer just a human ship. It had become a symbol of hope for every creature that dreamed of freedom. The final phase of the battle was swift and decisive. Caught between the human-inspired Alliance and their own crumbling command structure, the hegemony fleet began to surrender. Ship after ship powered down its weapons and sent distress signals requesting terms. Supreme Admiral Corks, watching his empire crumble around him, made one last desperate attempt to salvage victory from defeat. He ordered his flagship to ram the Defiant, hoping to destroy the symbol of resistance even at the cost of his own life. But the Eternal Dominion never reached its target. A dozen Allied vessels intercepted the massive ship, their combined firepower finally overwhelming its shields and armor. The explosion lit up half the system, marking the end of 3,000 years of tyrannical rule. In the aftermath, as rescue ships moved to evacuate the Defiant's survivors, Commander Reeves managed one final transmission to the galaxy. This is Commander Alex Reeves to all free peoples. The hegemony's reign of terror is over. But our work is just beginning. We must build something better. something worthy of the sacrifice made here today. Remember this moment. Remember that when good people stand together, no force in the universe can stand against them. The Defiant's reactor finally failed, its hull cracking open like an egg. But by then, rescue ships had evacuated the surviving crew members. 12 humans had lived to see the dawn of galactic freedom, their names destined to be remembered as long as civilizations endured. The war was far from over. Hegemony forces throughout the galaxy would continue fighting for months, unable to accept that their empire had fallen. But the psychological victory was complete. The galaxy had seen that resistance was possible, that freedom could be won through courage and sacrifice. Within a year, the hegemony's 3,000-year reign had completely collapsed. The Galactic Council that replaced it was built on principles the humans had demonstrated at Tau Ceti, that all species deserved freedom, that diversity was strength, and that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance could change the course of history. In the growing archives of the new government, the Battle of Tau Ceti was recorded not as humanity's last stand, but as the moment the galaxy learned to hope again. A single ship, crewed by 43 humans who refused to surrender, had shown the universe that even the mightiest empires could fall when faced with the simple power of beings who would not be moved. The Defiant was gone, but its legacy lived on in every world that chose freedom over submission, in every species that remembered what it meant to stand up to tyranny. 43 humans had changed the galaxy forever, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from superior firepower, but from the simple refusal to give up when everything seems lost. The stars themselves seemed brighter in the new galaxy, as if the universe itself was celebrating the return of hope to civilizations that had forgotten how to dream of better days.